Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is another episode of Life, the Universe, and Humanistic Judaism. My name is Paul Golan. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And today I am joined by Cantor Jonathan Friedmann, whose bio I'm going to read to you in a moment. But first, I want to welcome those of you who may never have been here before. As I always say at the beginning of these, this is a program specifically for members of either the Society for Humanistic Judaism directly or for one of our affiliated communities. It's a member benefit to thank you for supporting us through your membership. Most of the programming that we do is made freely available for everyone because we want to reach as many people as we can, and we will post the recording of this to our YouTube channel so folks can watch it afterwards. But for the people who are here, who are able to ask questions and participate and communicate directly, we also think about what we can do as a thank you, because we, even though we are a congregational denomination set up on that kind of traditional membership model, we also think of ourselves kind of on the PBS model, where what we want to do is provide this content for as many people as possible, recognizing that as a nonprofit, we need your help and we need your support. And especially as we come to the end of the calendar year, we ask for donations because that's what nonprofits do. So thank you, all of you, for your support. Those of you who are here are supporting Humanistic Judaism through your membership, either in SHJ or directly. And I don't know if you remember, Jonathan, but for this calendar year, you were our first guest, and now you're also ending the year with us. So I appreciate you doing it twice in one Gregorian calendar year, but of course we can break it up by the Jewish calendar, and then, that makes it your first time this calendar year. So let me introduce Cantor Jonathan Friedmann. Is PhD, is admissions director and associate professor at the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, vice president, academic dean, and director of programs at Esri Institute, and community leader of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, Los Angeles. He is also director of the Jewish Museum of the American West, president of the Western States Jewish History Association, and co-host of Amusing Jews, a YouTube podcast interview show celebrating Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. Jonathan has authored or edited over 30 books, including 100,000 Ways to Spell Hanukkah. Though I noticed in your bio you only spell it one way, which is the way that I argue it should be spelled, but okay. We'll get the book for the other 99,999 other ways. So thank you for being here. Welcome. You had a controversial title for this talk that I'm hoping won't end up in knock them down brawls by the participants, but tell us a bit about what you mean by the best Hanukkah music is Christmas music.
Yeah, I mean, an intentionally provocative title, obviously. There's that old cliched question, why did these Jewish composers write all these beautiful Christmas songs instead of Hanukkah songs? I mean, the answer is pretty obvious. We could stop it there and just say, well, there's not a lot of money to be made when you're writing Hanukkah music. But I think what's really intriguing about this topic, as we'll get into, is that it's not necessarily that these composers were writing Christmas music as Christmas music, right? If you take the word Christmas out of any of these songs that we'll be exploring today, you'll see that it's really winter music. Songs about the season, songs about even the joy and warmth and family that we might experience at Hanukkah. And you can take Christ out of Christmas and still have Christmas. We have secular Christmas. I would argue that most Jews these days, for a variety of reasons, one of which is intermarriage, are celebrating Christmas in one way or the other. We just don't necessarily promote that fact. But, it's also true that you can celebrate Hanukkah without the Maccabees and nothing really changes. And the Maccabees are arguably just as problematic as, the religious source material for Christmas. So the point is that we're dealing with holiday music, and others might say, Christ is in Christmas. The word Christmas is in these songs. How can you say this? Well, today's Thursday, which is Thor's Day, and I still observe Thursdays even though I don't worship Thor. So we'll get into these very hot button issues together. I just want to share my slides, which I prepared. Speaking of provocative, little known fact. This is from an old Yiddish newspaper, a Freilichen Christmas, Happy Christmas. I think it's important to put all of this in historic context. So Hanukkah's outsized importance as it has grown in the United States is often said to be an attempt to give Jewish kids something to do during Christmas. But historically, this is only partially true. Long before Irving Berlin wrote White Christmas in 1942, which inspired other Jewish songwriters to follow suit and create the secular soundtrack of Christmas, American Jews of Eastern and Central European descent, immigrants and the children of immigrants, were really downplaying already the holiday's religious message and enjoying the commodified dimensions of Christmas. In fact, it is said that Jewish immigrants were quick to adopt the trappings of Christmas, such as gift giving and evergreen conifer trees. A 1904 newspaper article noted that the purchase of Christmas gifts is one of the first things that proves one is no longer a greenhorn. So opinion pieces from that era also talk about how Jews were embracing Christmas customs without really any awareness or care about its Christian associations. And as late as the 1930s, the leadership of Young Judea, a Jewish youth movement, felt the need to announce, quote, "It should be made clear to members that Christmas, unlike Thanksgiving and Lincoln Day, is not a national American holiday. It is rather a purely Christian religious festival." So this is actually like the beginning of the December dilemma as we know it, when organizations started to catch on to the reality that Jews were celebrating Christmas with great enthusiasm, and they kind of created a problem for kids and started to exclude Jewish kids from Christmas. We'll get to that as well. But here's a movie that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but it's historically important, called The Jews' Christmas. It's about as bad as you probably think it is. 1913 silent film, interestingly directed by Lois Weber, who was one of 11 female directors with Universal in the silent era. And Weber herself was arguably one of the, if not the most prolific silent film directors of that era. Just an interesting side note. Universal, of course, was founded by Carl Laemmle, a German Jew. This is back before they moved out to Hollywood, 1913. They were still in New Jersey making films. And this movie is notable for a number of reasons. First of all, it's actually the first American film to include a rabbi as a leading character. Not played by a Jew, which is problematic, actually played by Philip Smalley, who is Lois Weber's husband and also co-director of the film with Weber. But the plot of the story is pretty interesting. It captures something of that period, again, early 20th century. So if I remember it correctly, there's this rabbi who is upset that his daughter has married a non-Jew, disowns the daughter. The daughter's husband gets in a trolley accident, loses his legs. They're reduced to poverty. They're living actually upstairs in a tenement building from the rabbi. The rabbi doesn't know that they're there. They have a daughter. The daughter befriends the rabbi and complains to the rabbi one year that she doesn't have enough money. Her family doesn't have enough money to purchase a Christmas tree. So the rabbi sells a religious text in order to pay for the Christmas tree for the daughter. She invites him over for a Christmas party. He then learns that it is, in fact, his granddaughter, and that, he starts to mingle again with his disowned daughter and her husband. And then also, there's a B plot to this story. This rabbi, who's not much of a mensch, he also disowned his son for another reason, and he returns at this time, and they all have a Jewish Christmas party together. I don't know if you're following the plot, but the point is that this was actually kind of maybe an artifact of the time that reflected aspirations of the time. It wasn't necessarily, a nasty film in any way, even though the title, The Jews' Christmas, might convey that. It actually captured some of this assimilationist, acculturationist, integrationist aspirations of Jewish immigrants, and the idea that Christmas was this great American holiday, this universal equalizer, and that if the rabbi can just celebrate Christmas, he'll finally understand what it means to be an American. So that brings us to another historical example. As was mentioned, much of my research deals with the American West. This is the Concordia Club having an elaborate fancy picnic in the 1890s or so. This is a club that started in 1891 in Los Angeles. It was the first specifically Jewish social club incorporated for, quote, the social and mental culture of its Jewish membership. This was like the elite club in LA at that time, turn of last century, with 100 very prominent Jewish families, what we call German Jews, which really means Jews of affluence. It was sort of a euphemism in those days. And they were known for a lot of things. They had decadent dinner parties, they had elaborate picnics, as you can see, dramatic presentations. They would do little plays and so forth. And of course, they had a legendary Christmas party, which every year was kind of the highlight of the Christmas season in Los Angeles. People from all around would come to see their decorated trees. It was the largest tree in the city, this sort of thing. And again, it was a Jewish club. No contradiction, and just a part of what they did. So, as I was saying before, Hanukkah kind of started to grow in response to all of this. The reality was not that Jews felt excluded from the Yuletide spirit, but that Jewish leaders and increasingly Jewish parents desired a Judaic alternative to the allure of Christmas. So the elevation of American Hanukkah began with advertisements in the 1920s. You might get a kick out of this, but adults were targeted with mahjong sets in these advertisements. And children's gifts were touted as, quote, a primitive but most effective means of making them immune against envy of the Christian children and their Christmas presents. So as a result of this concerted effort to kind of get Jews to not celebrate Christmas so enthusiastically, Hanukkah really is arguably the only Jewish holiday that has grown in importance in the United States, right? There are a lot of other holidays that were kind of minimized, discarded. I don't know how many people celebrate Shavuot, but it's not a lot because it happens in the summer and this sort of thing. But Hanukkah became like a major holiday. And there's a quote from a happy parent that I found from a newspaper in 1951, quote, "It is the good fortune of Hanukkah to become the first Jewish holiday to revive in an American setting." So this kid-centric element is really important to note as well. As you can see with some of this imagery here, you have a Hanukkah play, you have some dances, some songs, this sort of thing. There was a song that you're probably familiar with, the Love It or Hate It classic, I Have a Little Dreidel, from 1927 by Samuel Goldfarb and Samuel Grossman, the two Shmulies, as I call them. These kinds of songs were kind of it, kid-centric songs. Again, when we wonder why there isn't a lot of good, or any good, arguably, Hanukkah music, it's because it is this sort of kid-centric vibe that we're getting from this concerted effort to get kids to celebrate Hanukkah instead of Christmas. By the 1940s, Hanukkah menorahs became something of a niche industry with plastic menorahs, very fancy for that time, electric menorahs, musical menorahs, you name it. Even the colors of blue and white were introduced as an alternative to the red and green. There were booklets that would print instructions for costumes and dances and props and puppet shows. Innovative food items like Maccabean sandwiches, which were cut in the shape of Maccabean warriors because, eating religious zealots, I guess, became a part of the holiday. There was a menorah fruit salad, which capitalized on the fruit salad trend of the era, and this sort of thing. And then, of course, and I think this is still the legacy that we have today, after World War II, specifically Jewish women's groups were very concerned about re-emphasizing Hanukkah's role as a domestic festival of Jewish identity, which again, I think is really what Hanukkah is for most Jews. It's a festival of being Jewish. As Diane Ashton writes in her book, Hanukkah in America, quote, Jews felt increasing urgency that each Jewish child rather, must now grow into a healthy adult with a strong Jewish identity because 1/3 of the world's Jews had been murdered. So how do we get the Jewish Santa Claus and all that stuff? Whenever I see, parenthetically here, whenever I see Santa Claus not in the red, right? Not in the red suit, if it's a black and white photo or something like this, I think, you know what? I can kind of see the appeal with these Jewish immigrants coming to the United States. Santa Claus really does look like a Hasidic rabbi, doesn't he? It's Rebbe Kringle. I think there was something to that in terms of the natural appeal of Santa Claus, but I have to do some more research on that. Anyway, as we know, enterprising European Jewish immigrants and their children, who were often outsiders looking in, made a place for themselves in American society by essentially creating American entertainment and commercial industries. So while Hanukkah was being revived as this kid-centric, very elaborate Christmas-esque holiday, Jewish contributors were also very active, making what we know of as Christmas today, meaning the movies, the department stores, the toys, of course, the music as well. And what happened, again, historically, we see this pattern repeated quite a lot. Jews would gravitate to open professions with low status. Those professions that were of the elite were often closed off to Jewish immigrants and their children. So they started to get into things like comic books, right? Because they weren't able to work for the leading ad agencies, so they applied their artistic trades to comics instead. They weren't able to be in legitimate theater and opera and these sorts of things, so they went to vaudeville and created Broadway and popular music and this sort of thing. And we see this pattern over and over and over again in the American experience of contributors who were merchants, musicians, entertainers, who really helped to create what we think of as American culture. Historian Hasia Diner puts it this way: as long as Christmas has been there, there have been Jewish entertainers, whether they were peddlers going door to door or owners of large department stores. They were not there to foster interfaith goodwill. They were there to make money, and this was a golden opportunity. So again, if you ask why these Jewish songwriters didn't write any Hanukkah music, it's because there wasn't a lot of money to be made with that. But it's not just the music. I think it's important to note the Jewish role in commercializing Christmas and making it the secular holiday that we have today, which goes way beyond the musical contributions. You're, of course, familiar with Jewish department stores like Macy's and Bloomingdale's and Saks Fifth Avenue and Gimbel's, and out west, Neiman Marcus, May Company, these sorts of things. All Jewish, from this peddler experience, which was the ubiquitous Jewish trade. You have a peddler's cart, you have a tent, that becomes a brick and mortar store. If you get successful, you now have a warehouse, and then eventually you might have a department store. Again, because you're pushed out of other industries and you use the skills that you have. Even the Christmas effect of kind of decorating for the holidays, having holiday sales, having Santa Claus where you can sit on his lap and this sort of thing, that's all Jewish department store stuff. They invented that. And also toys, as you can see here. This is Louis Marx, very famously on the cover of the December 12th, 1955 issue of Time magazine. He was a leading toy manufacturer. He had the Marx Toy Company at that time. And you can see that he's eclipsing Santa Claus. right? Because he's the real reason why kids are happy on Christmas. You can see his toys swirling around and so forth. And of course, it's not just Louis Marx and his toy company, but we have virtually all of the major toy companies: Mattel, Hasbro, Kenner, Rimco, Marx, Galoob, Alexander Dolls, Lionel Trains, talking about stores, FAO Schwartz, Toys R Us, KB Toy Stores, all Jewish. And for the same reason, these were sort of um, neglected or disregarded fields the Jews found themselves in, and they made something out of it and turned the margins into the mainstream. Now, here's an interesting story. I don't know if you know about Kurt S. Adler, but as you can see here, bringing holiday joy to the world, as it were, since 1946. Well, Adler was born in Bavaria in southern Germany in 1921. At the age of 16, with the sponsorship of an uncle, he came to the United States. He served in World War II in the Army in Honolulu, and there he started to make some business connections that he would later develop into an import-export business company, where he said that he would send pineapples to Switzerland and umbrellas to Nicaragua and this sort of thing. And then he stumbled upon an idea by the late 40s, early 50s, that maybe what America is missing is sort of a Northern European sensibility as it pertains to Christmas. And he started to import ornaments and decorations with this kind of German charm. Most families in those days, some of you may remember, before the ornament craze, there were just kind of glass balls on the tree and tinsel, and they were kind of like drab or, not that exciting, not that customized. And it was Adler who brought nutcrackers and angels and reindeer and this sort of thing to American Christmas, a Jewish guy. And the family is still Jewish run. His son, Cliff Adler, is the co-president of the company now. And he was remarking, that if someone says to him, "Isn't it kind of odd for Jews to specialize in Christmas decorations?" He says, "Well, your guy was Jewish to start." I like that line. Okay, so that gets us to the music. Well, when we're thinking about, Jewish contributions to the American Christmas music repertoire, this is really where it begins. This film, Holiday Inn, 1942, directed by a Jewish director, Mark Sandrich, features 12 original songs by Irving Berlin, one of which is White Christmas. And that was the real turning point. Interestingly enough, the film also includes reused rendering of Easter Parade, which was a song that Irving Berlin wrote in 1933 for a Broadway production and was later used in the 1948 film Easter Parade. And if that caught on in the same way that White Christmas caught on, we might be talking about Jewish contributions to secular Easter music. But to my knowledge, Easter Parade's probably it. So it didn't really have the same kind of impact. So then the question is, like, why did White Christmas have the impact that it did? And really, it has to do with World War II. The December of 1942 was the first year that we had millions of American soldiers really sent away from their homes, many overseas. And the song was all about nostalgia, kind of being back home, remembering what things used to be. So you had the soldiers themselves hearing this on Army radio or what have you, and you had the people back home missing their loved ones. And this song really struck a chord. By the way, if you listen to the original rendition, what we sing is the chorus, right? I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. Beautiful song. But it begins with a verse where he's talking about how he wants to be back home, and he's sitting essentially by the pool in Beverly Hills and dreaming of, being back north where it's all snowy. Of course, that's a very personal verse. The verses that we exclude from a lot of these older songs tend to have that more setup storytelling kind of quality. But the rest of the song was very universal, right? It struck a chord, as I mentioned, with families at that time. And composer Rob Capello, who's a noted expert on this Jewish Christmas music phenomenon, he sums up the appeal of White Christmas. Quote, though the song contains only two images of Christmas, treetops glistening and children listening to sleigh bells, that was enough to allow Americans to imagine a reassuring, idealized Norman Rockwell, Currier and Ives, small town New England past with sleigh rides and falling snow, a mythic secular American Christmas on which the country could project its dreams. So here's a handful of songs. Very interestingly, you can see on the top left, Winter Wonderland, which was originally written in 1934. It was a hit when it was written, but it wasn't considered a Christmas song. It was a romantic song. It would later be repurposed. I think there's a newer version that came out in 1947. It became a hit again, and it sort of capitalized on the Christmas craze. So that actually predates Holiday Inn again from 1942, Winter Wonderland from 1934. And this repurposing of Winter Wonderland as a Christmas song is kind of interesting also, just from a history of music perspective. I'm sure you know Jingle Bells, but did you know that Jingle Bells was actually written in the 1850s as a Thanksgiving song and only became a Christmas song because, again, of the popularity of Christmas songs? My favorite things, which I think we know from Rodgers and Hammerstein's Sound of Music, musical from 1959. The movie was in 1965. This is now a Christmas song too, and has been for a while. And you might be wondering, like, what's the connection? You'll hear it on Christmas radio shows and that kind of thing. It's not just that, it's about sort of wanting things and, toys and whatever, commercialism, capitalism, whatever we associate with Christmas. Actually, I looked this up. In 1961, Julie Andrews sang that song, My Favorite Things, on the Gary Moore Christmas special. And really from that moment on, it became associated with Christmas. So that's another Jewish song that wasn't written, or I should say a song written by Jews that wasn't originally written for Christmas that became a Christmas song. But anyway, here's 10 of the big hits. Winter Wonderland, White Christmas, The Christmas Song, otherwise known as Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire, Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Silver Bells, Santa Baby, Rocking Around the Christmas Tree, It's the Most Wonderful Time of Year, Holly Jolly Christmas. The list really goes on. So just 10 that came to mind. But check this out. I did a little word frequency analysis. These are just some of the words that appear in more than one of these songs. I didn't use the word Christmas, that was too obvious. But as you can see, snow, year, jolly bright, fire, happy, children, bells, holiday light, season, party, cheer. I mean, doesn't that sum it up? That's pretty much what these songs are about. I would argue that's sort of what Hanukkah is about too, only, it's a Jewish identity holiday with all of these things. And if we were just to sing these words, I think we could come up with a new Christmas song hit. Let's find out. Snow year, jolly bright, fire, happy, children, bells, holiday lights, season, party, cheer. So there you go. That's what these songs are really all about. Just want to leave you with one last story. This is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This is actually a little bit from the original manuscript, as you see on your screen. That song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or I should say the story, rather, was written for the Montgomery Ward Company in 1939 by Robert L. May, a secular Jew. This was kind of an in-house alternative to what Montgomery Ward was doing already at that time, which was giving away books as gifts for kids during the holiday season. they thought it might be better for the bottom line if they just made an in-house book. So May, who was a copywriter for Montgomery Ward, was tasked with writing this story. And of course, he drew inspiration from The Ugly Duckling, but also from his own past. He grew up in an area with not a lot of Jews and was picked on for being small and having a big nose, wink, wink, when he was a kid. And so decided to write a story that kind of showed his own and maybe the Jewish experience writ large. I don't know, that might be projecting. But this idea of like being pushed aside and then finding some secret skill that made you the envy of everyone else, right? So a lot of people detect kind of a Jewish subtext in this parable. That not only was he ostracized for having a big nose and pushed to the margins by the coded Gentile reindeers, we might say, but that in fact, he also triumphed and became essential to the reindeer community, right? The Jewish success story. I should note too that his brother-in-law, Johnny Marks, was the one who wrote the music for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in 1949, first popularized by Gene Autry. Then in 1964, that becomes, of course, the stop animation classic, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, where other songs were introduced by Marks, such as Holly Jolly Christmas and Silver and Gold, et cetera, et cetera. And Johnny Marks, again, Jewish, was so successful with Christmas music that he founded a company called St. Nicholas Music and specialized in Christmas music. But getting back to the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I think there's one little aspect that I only discovered as I was pondering this story a couple of years ago, which is that there are, in addition to Rudolph, 8 other reindeer, right? We have Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen. And then you got the one that has the light, Rudolph. If you're following me, I'm starting to think that this is a metaphorical menorah. And in fact, if you put Rudolph in the center, he's the shamash. He lights the other ones. He lights the way on this foggy Christmas night. So it could be, and I've kind of convinced myself that it is, that this song is actually a Hanukkah song. So that's all I have for slides. I would love to do a Q&A as well, as I think we did last time.
That was great. I was on mute, so you did not hear me laughing out loud at multiple times. I feel like I want to add a laugh track to the recording before I post it to YouTube, because that was so funny. And I loved how you brought in, of course, the toys, but made it much bigger than I thought it was going to be. And I love the idea of Rudolph as the shamash, which I'm absolutely going to convince my kids is what it really is all about. So thank you so much for that presentation. It's funny, before I open up for Q&A, I just want to say, it's astounding how many of those songs are written by Jews. And I really appreciate the historic context that you put it into, so that it does make sense, but it's still remarkable. But the one that I was thinking of is Silent Night, which I Googled, and it's actually very old, early 1800s. And because that's the one that I got upset at when my kids' public school had them sing it. And, because there's theology in it, right? It is talking about our Lord Jesus and so on, which I had to complain to the principal about. And so what's striking me is all of and the word breakdown that you did is so cool. And I noticed that Jesus was not among those words, right? So it's like these were mostly secular Jews, and they were not incorporating any of that kind of theology, or are there examples that I'm just not thinking of that Jews actually?
Yeah, that is a key characteristic, right? So, and people point to that as maybe an agenda, right? That these Jews were not using churches and Jesus and angels and this sort of thing. because they were trying to secularize Christmas. But again, it's really important to note that Christmas already had this very robust secular characteristic before they plugged in these songs and sort of gave it a soundtrack. So it's an interesting thing. I think if we're being, if we can take a step back from Hanukkah, I think Hanukkah also has a religious characteristic and a secular version, kind of in these parallel tracks, very much like Christmas has. So it wasn't that they weren't, doing this because they were trying to transform Christmas into this, winter universal holiday. It's that one, again, already Christmas had this secular quality, and two, they're writing what they knew, right? You're not going to get a lot of Jews writing about the church experience because it just isn't something that they're familiar with. And ultimately, they were writing songs that captured what people were feeling. So I think what you're talking about with the schools, sometimes throwing in, some of the more religious carols like Silent Night, etc. I think that that's more agenda driven by some of the schools and some of the music directors who want to like remind people of the real story of Christmas or whatever. And it is a little bit uncomfortable as you're describing.
Yeah, and I think that there's real parallels. I mean, you're saying that this kind of secularization of Christmas already existed, but I do feel like the Jews who are writing these songs help crystallize it in a way that is parallel to, if you watch or read some of the stuff about how the Jews invented Hollywood, that it's not just they invented Hollywood, they invented a vision of America that so many Americans share that maybe was all there already. They didn't create something dramatically different, but they crystallized it in a way that then people, when they hear things about American values, or even pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, was like the immigrant experience that they crystallized in movies and they did it in comic books and so on. So I had not really made that parallel around Christmas music until now. So thank you so much for that. Peter asked in the chat to me, can you talk a bit about the December dilemma and the aftermath of the Holocaust in music via Crosby, radio, movies, and TV specials, etc.? You want to dig deeper a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I will say that the December dilemma, as it's sometimes called, I think this year, especially pronounced with the convergence of, Christmas being on December 25th and Hanukkah being on the 25th of Kislev and them overlapping on the 25th. It's kind of fun and exciting for some people, but it's very troubling for others, right? Again, the dilemma part is more recent, and it really is, post World War II, where the different fears and anxieties in the Jewish community about erasure really became prominent, right? And this would continue with, the fears of intermarriage, which would happen, really starting in the 60s and so forth. And this idea that we have to keep separate. We can be American, we can be fully American, but we have to remind ourselves that we're Jews. And so this aversion to Christmas really, to use Paul's term, crystallized at that time, right? But again, like parallel to this concerted effort to build up Hanukkah as an alternative to Christmas, Jews were still contributing very heavily in Christmas, right? This is still the era that gives us those songs, the department stores, the toy companies, all this stuff. So, Jews are never a monolith. I can tell you personally, growing up in a household with two Jewish parents, one with German ancestry, the other with Ukrainian ancestry, Ashkenazi all the way back, I think, to the beginning of time. I'm probably 99% Ashkenazi and 1% Neanderthal, right? Given all of that, I mean, we grew up with Christmas for no reason other than it was just a fun American holiday, right? And of course, we had Hanukkah also, and that just like doubled the pleasure, So there was never a dilemma in my own personal life, but I can understand for some that the Jewish identity is obviously under threat. There's this tenuous sort of anxiety, this relationship we have to America where we want to carve out a place for ourselves, our own distinctness. But what I try to tell people is that if you're looking at Christmas, the secular Christmas, in the way that we just were, maybe we can start to see Christmas in its secular version as kind of a Jewish holiday also, especially if we embrace a broader view of what it means to be Jewish and a broader view of what Jewish culture is. These are really important Jewish cultural contributions to the world, just as we might celebrate, Sandy Koufax, or, the guy who invented the shopping cart, who happened to be Jewish. We're very proud of all this stuff. We can be proud of this too, and, notice that all these decorations on our neighbors' lawns, they include things that, relate to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, for instance. They're celebrating a Jewish folk hero.
I love that. And absolutely. And I think the beginning of your PowerPoint got at some of this in terms of like the early 20th century was a time when most of the Jews in America were immigrants themselves and were finding ways to be Jewish. And then, like you said, after World War II, and especially when it got much bigger in the 60s and 70s as far as intermarriage goes, there was kind of like that record scratching noise when the Jewish community would, like, for example, the Jewish community centers, right, were created, first of all, because Jews couldn't join the YMCA, but also as a way to help Jewish immigrants become American. Like that was their mission, was helping Jews become American. And then that kind of record scratch of, wow, we did such a good job that what does it even mean to be Jewish? And so there was a massive restructuring of programs and institutions, and it continues in some ways to this day in the Jewish community to help American Jews become more Jewish. Like we had succeeded so well in becoming American. And the example you're giving from your own personal story of having two Jewish parents and still celebrating Christmas, that was a common thing, certainly from the immigrant experience, because, oh, this is what we do as Americans. And it didn't really become that December dilemma till the 70s, 80s, 90s, when the Jewish community, which made it the December dilemma, got so paranoid about, oh, we're going to lose them as Jews. There was a point where maybe 15 years ago, John Ruskay, who ran UJA Federation of New York, which is still the largest local charity in the world, wrote a piece acknowledging that he had a Christmas tree. And here he was running UJA Federation of New York, and both his parents were Jewish too. So the challenge, the issue, the fear was that as long as both your parents are Jewish, you can do whatever you want and you're still Jewish. And I called this actually like born Jewish privilege, right? You can say and do whatever you want. It's only when there's the fear of incorporating other traditions within your own household by somebody who's not Jewish, that really is when this notion of December dilemma happened. And it's still a very much debated. I think there's less heat now, but like Chrismica, which what was that, the OC, which I admit I never watched, but became a thing. And then it still upsets people that you can, I've heard folks say you can celebrate both, but don't combine them, right? Because then that does a disservice to both of them. So Chrismica is off the table, but Christmas and Hanukkah, that's okay, right? It's like, so I appreciate that for the most part, we don't try to police how people celebrate live.
I'll just add that just because December dilemma is a nice alliteration doesn't mean it's true.
Does anyone want to ask a question directly? If you want to raise your hand either physically or through the Zoom interface. Eva?
I don't know. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay, and I put this into the chat. I think we're focusing too much on Christmas and Hanukkah, but with the increase in intercultural families, I think it's much more important to start teaching about both their origins, and those would be winter solstice, bringing light in darker times. And why don't we write more songs about winter solstice that can be incorporated into intercultural families more easily?
I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, I'm just thinking, Christmas is 2 syllables, winter is 2 syllables. I bet you could go through these Christmas songs and just change the word Christmas to winter, and you might satisfy exactly what you're wanting, which is to, bring it back to the true origins, which is, again, like you said, bringing light into the world, having, these warm feelings at this time of cold and so forth. So, walking in a winter wonderland is a great example, actually, because there's no mention of Christmas at all in that song. And again, it wasn't even written as a Christmas song. That is a winter solstice kind of song, right? We have examples of this. We could probably tweak others to make them so. And I think you're right too, because as I mentioned before, the religious overlays on the solstice, one which is Hanukkah and the other which is Christmas, they're both problematic in their own ways. I think a mature person realizes that. And to go back to the origins, which is really more about our place in the universe and axial tilt and that sort of thing, I think that that's actually a very positive way to kind of bring it all together. I
Okay,
like that idea.
Jonathan, start writing.
Well, wait a sec, because I was going to say that the song he needs to write is a Festivus song, because there is no Festivus song, and I think that would do really well. So get in line. Actually, though, I want to kind of reply on this one also, because I think one of the things is that the reason why it is Christmas related or named is because of the weight, the historic weight of an existing holiday. And that, so for example, do you know, I don't know, I didn't know, and until I started this job, there is a humanistic solstice holiday called Human Light. Is that right? Oh my God, I forgot what it's called.
It's called Orot.
Really?
O-R-O-T, which means light in Hebrew.
No, a humanist holiday. That's a humanist, like American Humanist Association. I think it's called Human Light, and I think it's on December 23rd, which is also Festivus, by the way. So there's a conflict there, another December dilemma. But Bob, you know what it's called?
Yes, you're right. It's Human Light.
Human Light,
And,
right? No songs, no history. Like, let's just start from scratch. And
yeah, here in Baltimore, we have a group called the Coalition of Reason, of which our Chavara is a member, and it's in a bunch of other cities too. And every year, as you say, on December 23rd, they get together for a Human Light celebration. And, there's candle lighting, and that's about it.
Yeah, and to me, first of all, I think it's worth trying those kind of things. But when I'm in coalition with the Secular Coalition for America, which SHJ is a member of, and there is sometimes conversation about why do you still bother, right, with the Jewish thing when we can all just be humanists? Or, even the word humanist is debated because we should all just be atheists, or we should all just be free thinkers, right? So there's no consensus. But I do hear the questions of, why continue with that? But the historic weight of Hanukkah, the fact that like you said, going all the way back, my ancestors celebrated this holiday. And this one actually is tied to actual history that we can, that we can verify from other sources. That to me makes it so much more powerful and interesting. And I think that's why suggesting that, can't we remove Christmas altogether or religion altogether and just make it about science, the earth going around the sun, that I think loses a piece that people don't want to give up. So and I'm not saying it's either or. I think we can try to do a lot of it or all of it, but there is that piece that I think we could actually maximize or take more advantage of than we do, because of the ties to the actual history and to our own, family celebrations and so on. So I don't think Christmas is going away anytime soon.
I don't think it's going away. And by the way, like personally, because of my own experience with Christmas my whole life, I've always experienced Christmas as a Jew, right? And really seen it as, again, as I'm trying to articulate it, kind of a Jewish holiday in and of itself. It doesn't compete with Hanukkah. It's nice to have, both of them. And adding a solstice thing to that. And of course, Festivus, which we could talk about maybe next year. All of it. I don't think the appropriation component of celebrating Kwanzaa is on the table for me. But, I know that that is another holiday of the season. And so we could go kind of on and on. But the thing is, like, for someone who is very sort of grounded and confident in their own Jewishness, you can celebrate virtually any holiday and nothing's going to happen to your identity.
Right. There's also the component of being culturally Jewish, where other cultures don't threaten you the way being religiously Jewish, you may feel more threatened by even just saying the word Christ in Christmas or whatever. I think that's an advantage that we get to take by being culturally Jewish. So I'm going to go Miriam, Richard, then Peter, because you already asked the question, Peter. So let's hear from Miriam and then Richard. Miriam?
So I've been reflecting on some of what Eva said in dealing with people who are either in intermarriages or people who are becoming Jews for the first time. The reason why I think some of those merging holidays don't work as well is because if anyone in the family has this like really strong connection to their childhood family memories, it doesn't work as well. So when my husband and I first got together and it was in October and then we started talking about the holidays, he says, I'm going to get lights. I said, what are you going to get lights for? He said, the outside of the house. I said, no. The outside of the house means that you're Christian. And that was my childhood memory, driving through our neighborhood. This is a Christian house. This is a Jewish house. This is a Christian house. This is a Jewish house. We have a beautiful Christmas tree. I couldn't do the lights. So I think that exists.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Drawing the line. And it has very little to do about social norms even, or, conventions. It's really personal. All of this stuff is personal.
Richard?
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful program. And as the son of a Methodist minister, the grandson of a Methodist minister too, I have a lot of reasons to appreciate what you're saying, because one of the things that was very clear from my childhood is that even in our minister's family home, Santa was a much bigger deal at Christmas than the birth of Jesus. I can tell you, and that was true throughout the church. But the other thing I wanted to say is, if you look at so many of the traditions that have become part of the observance of Christmas, the Yule log, the tree, the story of a bearded man in a sleigh being pulled by reindeer, that image actually, that comes from the Sami people of Northern Europe. Actually, the elves, if you look at the traditional dress of the Sami people of Northern Scandinavia, they dress like the iconic picture of the Christmas elves. So there are many things actually beyond secular. We're talking pagan. So it's really very interesting. Thank you so much. Really great.
Thank you.
Peter?
Two quick things. I just happened to have on my table, I was looking at the other day, Festivus with an forward by Jerry Stiller. So glad you brought that up. The main thing I want to mention is that we had a family friend who's a school teacher for the Brooklyn Public Schools, and she wrote a version of White Christmas in Yiddish, and she would never give me the lyrics. My point is of changing these Christmas songs into Yiddish, re-owning it or making fun of it or twisting it around. Do you have any thoughts on that people doing that or performing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very classic thing to do. And people forget, I think they forget a lot about Irving Berlin. You know, we remember him for White Christmas and for God Bless America. But before he started writing kind of the American songbook and shaping, you know, the American culture through these songs, as Paul was alluding to, he did write funny songs with Yiddish inflection, Yinglish, you know, sort of mixing English and Yiddish. One of his famous songs of his earlier period is called Cohen Owes Me $97, right? So he had himself this sort of very cheeky Jewish sense of humor. And as he became more and more American through his career and more grateful as an immigrant and so forth, he started to write things like God Bless America. But I think he would even appreciate, if we're thinking like, who would we offend if we turned White Christmas into Yiddish? It certainly wouldn't be Irving Berlin, you know? And in fact, you know, just sort of doing that reemphasizes, sort of brings to our attention in a very visceral way that this song was written by a Jew. So I think that is a powerful thing.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great and a lot of fun and a great way to kind of go into the holiday season and the new year. So thank you so much for doing it. And thanks everybody for being here. I wish you very happy holidays and a happy new year. And we'll see you again the third Thursday of January 2025. Take care.